Morning everyone. Today we will have a look at the fourth ventricle. We'll have different views. The first one, as you can see in this specimen, at this part you can see the midbrain, the tectum, the tegmentum, the aqueduct, and the two colliculi, the superior and inferior. Extending from the caudal border or the edge of the tectum, you can see this fold, which is clear in the other specimen. Now in this specimen you can see that. You see this fold and you see this fold. Both of these folds, along with the flow of the fourth ventricle, which is the base, forms this triangular region, and in this part is called the roof. So you can see the part of the roof, which is the superior part. You can see part of the roof, which is the inferior part. In the superior part, this membrane that you can see is made up of two structures. The lining epithelium of this part and the lining epithelium of the ventricle here is ependyma. External to the ependyma is a thin layer of white matter. And this upper roof, half of this roof, this upper part, is called the superior medullary velum, which you can see here. The inferior one is not very clear in this specimen. We will see it in the other specimen. So for the time being, you can see the fourth ventricle. It's a triangular space. If you take the roof, the superior part of the roof, the inferior part of the roof, and the floor of the ventricle, so the whole thing comprises of the fourth ventricle. What you can see in this specimen, now this is the pons from here to here, and this is the medulla. If you look at the fourth ventricle, you can see most of the fourth ventricle, almost entirely, is located posterior to the pons. A small part, the smaller, inferior or caudal part of the fourth ventricle, is related posterior to the medulla, to the upper half of the medulla. So this is the extent of the fourth ventricle vertically. So it extends from the base of the tectum, or from the inferior boundary of the inferior colliculus, right up to the point where the central canal of the medulla is formed, which is exactly at this spot. So from this point downwards, there is a central canal, no fourth ventricle. So this is called the closed part of the medulla. From this point up to the pontomedullary junction, which is here, this is the open part of the medulla, which is part of the fourth ventricle. So you can see the superior medullary velum. Actually, this one is now the superior cerebellar peduncle, which has appeared there. In this one, you can see the velum, thin velum. Now let's take a look at this specimen. So we are going to open up. So we are opening up the two occipital lobes of the cerebral hemisphere, and we are opening up the cerebellum. Now we are looking at the posterior surface of the brain stem. Yes, I think that's clear. Okay, so we're looking at the posterior surface of the brain stem. Cranially or rostrally, you can see the four colliculi. They are visible here. Two superior colliculi, two inferior colliculi. And there is a groove, vertical groove and a horizontal groove, two sulci. And this is called the entire structure. This cross that you can see here is called the cruciform sulcus. You can see it here. Cranial to the superior colliculus, if you go cranial, you can see the pineal body, the pineal gland. So that's very clear. So that's the pineal gland. And if I go to the side, you can see the cerebral peduncle, one on this side and one on this side, this one, this white structure, the two cerebral peduncles. Okay, now let's go down here, this point. This structure, where this one is the superior medullary velum, so you can see the two, and they meet at a point forming a ridge just inferior to the inferior colliculi, this point. Okay? And this is called the frenulum, the point where they join together. So now the fourth ventricle has been opened up. So the roof of the fourth ventricle has been opened up, and you can see the floor of the fourth ventricle right up to this point. This is the trochlear nerve, you can see it coming out from here. Oh, broken. Now you can see. Okay, in terms of the relations, now you can see the fourth ventricle. You can see its boundaries. Okay, if you look at now, we have already discussed in the class the boundaries of the floor of the fourth ventricle. So what are the boundaries? You see the superior boundary here, superolateral on this side and on this side. Now you can't see the exact structure, but it is the superior cerebellar peduncle. So let me show the peduncle to you on this specimen. So if you see this specimen, that is the superior cerebellar peduncle. This is the superior cerebellar peduncle. Okay, and that's forming the lateral boundary of the floor of the fourth ventricle. So on this side is the superior cerebellar peduncle, on this side is the superior cerebellar peduncle. Inferiorly, you can see these two borders meet at a point, and that's called the obex. This line and this border and this border. So you now have a superolateral border and two inferolateral borders. The superolateral borders are meeting at a point just inferior to the inferior colliculi. The inferior borders are meeting at a point, and that point is called the obex, and just anterior to that is the opening of the central canal, where the fourth ventricle continues into the medulla. So this is the open part of the medulla that you can see, and from here onwards is the closed part of the medulla. So now let's look onto the floor of the fourth ventricle. You see this median sulcus going all the way down, from rostral to caudal, from cranial to caudal, from superior to inferior. This is called the dorsal median sulcus. Lateral to that, you see this thin line bilaterally, which is descending up to this point. That groove, one here and one here, is the sulcus limitans. And that comes down all the way up to this point. Now, between the sulcus limitans and the dorsal median sulcus is a raised area, which I'm showing right now. So this raised area is called the medial eminence. So see the medial eminence, and on the medial eminence, you see a rounded zone, which is the area for the facial colliculus. So this is the medial eminence. This is the facial colliculus, and we go down here and we continue up to this point. Let's look at this region now. So we have seen the facial colliculus, we have seen the medial eminence. Going down to the lateral side, you see a triangular area, very clear in this region. Okay? This is the area which overlies the vestibular nuclei, the pontine component of the vestibular nuclei, or the superior portion of the vestibular nuclei. So this is the vestibular area, this is the medial eminence, this is the facial colliculus, and the vestibular area can also be seen on this side, but on this side it's more clear. So that's the vestibular area. If you go above, you see a small opening sort of a thing on two sides. So these two are called the superior fovea. And just inferior to that is an area which the color of which is the same as the entire area, but actually in a freshly cut specimen, this will show very light bluish tinge. Okay? This is called the locus ceruleus. So at this point. So here the two fovea, the superior foveae, and this is the area is called the locus coeruleus. It is above the vestibular area and it's lateral, superolateral to the medial eminence. Then as we come down into, so while we describe this, the floor, we can say that this rhomboid fossa, or the floor of the fourth ventricle, which is like a rhomboid, has a larger superior triangular part and a smaller inferior triangular part. So this was the superior part which I've described. Now you look at the inferior part. This is the triangle. This is the base of the triangle. And yes, can you see this shiny structure going horizontally here? A shiny, white, sort of a glistening line, shining line. That's called the stria medullaris. These are fibers which are coming from within the medulla, from the arcuate nuclei. And from here, they go to the dorsum, they go to the floor of the fourth ventricle, and then they are transmitted to the cerebellum, passing through the inferior cerebellar peduncles. So that's the stria medullaris. So the stria medullaris actually is the structure which is demarcating the difference between the larger superior triangle and the smaller inferior triangle. So that is the stria medullaris. And the stria medullaris extends to the side. Now if you look at this point, now since we have not removed the cerebellum, had we removed the cerebellum, you would have seen the middle cerebellar peduncle and the inferior cerebellar peduncle. Now in this structure you can't see it. However, if you look onto this specimen, this is superior, this is inferior, this is the midbrain, this is the pons, this is the medulla, and here is the inferior cerebellar peduncle, this one. So if I cut this area and I remove the cerebellum, then I'll get the middle cerebellar peduncle which will be cut, and I will also get the inferior cerebellar peduncle which will be cut. So back to this point. So if I look at this point, it appears as if the fourth ventricle cavity is going to the lateral side. This is called the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle, and that is going just below the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So it extends below the inferior cerebellar peduncle, and the lateral recess of the fourth ventricle, it continues outside and it opens into the CSF space, subarachnoid space. Present within the lateral recess is this structure. And can you magnify it, please? Bottom. Make it full if you can. I want to see this. What I'm trying to show you is this. And if you see, it looks like a woolly. It looks like it has many small folds. It is not straight. It is convoluted. Can you see that here? This is a structure which is within the fourth ventricle, and it extends bilaterally through the two lateral recesses, and that opens into the cerebrospinal space or the subarachnoid space. This is the choroid plexus of the fourth ventricle. So the choroid plexus is shaped like a T. Now in this specimen, we can't see the stem of the T because it's been cut off while clearing the area. But you can see the horizontal part, the bar of the T. It passes through the two lateral recesses of the fourth ventricle, and it passes out into subarachnoid space. The stem passes out here. So if you now imagine, so look from the side, just pull this here. Out, yeah, that's okay. Now you can see the superior medullary velum. The inferior velum cannot be seen, but at least you can see the roof of the inferior part of the fourth ventricle. At this point, the roof, so these two will join together. So the right side will meet the left side and they will fuse together. So it will form like a tent. That's the roof of the fourth ventricle. So when you open it up, it's like this. So these are the two borders which I'm showing you at this point. These two will be coming together to seal the roof. So the roof is sealed except at the inferior point, except at this point. So when you close it, at the lower part, in this point, there is an opening in the roof. And this is the median foramen of Magendie. So that's located here. If you look at the two lateral recesses, the opening in the lateral recess They are called the foramina of Luschka. They are the two lateral foramina, and there is a single median foramina, which is a defect in the roof on the inferior surface or the inferior part of the roof of the fourth ventricle. So that's the median. So the stem of the T passes through it. Actually, the choroid plexus is formed by smaller branches of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery, and these branches enter through the foramen of Magendie. They move in, then they move to the two sides and they extend. So the choroid plexus extends. Now you can see the median sulcus, the dorsal median sulcus. This is the sulcus limitans extending at this point. So the sulcus limitans, which came from there, it's continuing on to this point. Can you see the groove here? Very clear, actually. So you can see the sulcus limitans, and you see the median, the dorsal median sulcus, and you see a triangle here. This is the hypoglossal triangle, and you see another triangle at this point, which is the vagal triangle. So hypoglossal triangle, vagal triangle, dorsal median sulcus, sulcus limitans. Now, if I trace the sulcus limitans on this side, and if I trace the sulcus limitans on this side, it appears like the nib of a fountain pen with the capillary point at this, with the small slit here. So this whole structure is called the calamus scriptorius. It's like the nib of a fountain pen. And just at the mouth where the central canal is continuing, just at the mouth there is a slight hyperpigmented zone. Now you may see the pigmentation, you may not see it. But this raised small part here is what is referred to as the area postrema. And deep to the area postrema is a specific part of the reticular formation, which is called the so-called vomiting center. So that's located at this point. All right, now let's go down into the posterior surface of the medulla. So I'll just clean this area up. You can see a lot of these small blood vessels. Okay. Now, if we are looking at the closed part of the medulla from the posterior aspect, and this is this, so we are now looking at this area. You see a small sulcus here. This raised part is the gracile tubercle, this raised part. And lateral to that, this swollen area, this part is the cuneate tubercle. So you have the gracile tubercle, cuneate tubercle. So if you look at the boundary of the inferior part of the fourth ventricle, the boundary corresponds to the medially to the gracile tubercle and laterally to the cuneate tubercle. So that completes the boundary of the floor of the fourth ventricle. Now, the thing that I've not shown you so far is this region, the part which corresponds. Now, this is the superior medullary velum, the part which is located inferiorly. Now, this part is actually made up of two things. It's made up of the ependyma, and covering the surface of the ependyma is a thin layer of pia mater. So the pia mater, which is on the posterior surface of the brainstem, it runs over the ependyma and it folds over the flocculus region of the cerebellum, and then it becomes continuous with the cerebellum. So here, in the lower part of the roof, on the inferior or the caudal part of the roof, we have two layers. One is the ependyma, covered externally by the pia mater, single fold. And then the pia mater folds over itself and becomes continuous over the cerebellum. So here we have a double fold of pia mater. And this is different from this region. The superior medullary velum contains internally the ependyma and externally a thin layer of white matter. So this is the basic difference. So inferiorly, this part is made up of two layers, ependyma internally and pia mater externally, and then the pia mater extends inside, folds upon itself and comes here. And passing there are branches of the posterior inferior cerebellar artery. And from here rises the choroid plexus, which enters the fourth ventricle. So that's the point. And the foramen of Magendie is here at this point. Now, since we are on the side, so we are not in the center, so you can't see the foramen, but this is where the choroid plexus. So this is the choroid plexus, and the double fold of pia mater, which is observed, which is located here, is called the tela choroidea. So tela choroidea is a double fold of pia mater attached to the inferior part of the roof of the fourth ventricle. Okay, so that completes what we are supposed to see today. Thank you.